On the 1st of August, 1668, a Spanish mule train walked into an occupied city carrying 100,000 pesos, 27 bars of silver, with chests of gold and silver coin. It was a payment for the city itself. The men receiving it had held Portobello for 3 weeks. They had not come to loot it. Looting was the old model, and the old model had a ceiling. These men had captured an entire town, its 3 fortresses, and its people, and then offered Spain a simple commercial proposition. Buy it back or watch it burn. The buyer paid. In the ledgers of the Caribbean, this was not recorded as a battle. It was recorded as a sale. The seller was a Welsh privateer named Henry Morgan. The product was a city, and the transaction made every man on his payroll the equivalent of 5 or 6 years of wages for 5 weeks of work. What follows is how the deal was built, what it cost to execute, and who actually collected the margin. The numbers survive. They describe one of the most profitable single operations in the history of organized crime. To price a city, first understand why this one had a price. Portobello sat on the Atlantic coast of the Isthmus of Panama, and through it passed the wealth of a continent. Silver from the mines of Peru sailed north to Panama City. From there, mule trains hauled it overland to Portobello's harbor. At the docks, the Spanish treasure fleet loaded it for Seville. At their peak, around 1600, the Peruvian mines fed this route with an estimated 9 million pesos a year. Portobello was the 3rd largest city on the Spanish Main, and one of the strongest, defended by 3 fortresses. It was, in effect, the loading dock of an empire. 200 miles north lay the counterparty. England had seized Jamaica, and Spain refused to recognize the loss. With no treaty and no navy to spare, Jamaica's governors defended the island by subcontract. Privateers were invited to base themselves at Port Royal, and their license was a document called a letter of marque, a government permit to attack the king's enemies at private expense. The permit created an industry. Port Royal became the home port of what its members called the Confederacy of Buccaneers, and by 1668, its rising admiral was Henry Morgan, commander of the island's militia. The arrangement suited everyone. England got a free navy, the Buccaneers got legal cover, and the paperwork, as will become clear, got a price of its own. The city ransom model itself was not Morgan's invention. Portobello had been sold back to Spain once before. The English privateer William Parker captured and ransomed the town in 1601, 67 years earlier. The precedent mattered because it established the one fact every ransom depends on. Spain would pay. An empire that shipped its treasury through a single harbor could not leave that harbor in enemy hands and could not easily replace it. The town's value to its owner was therefore always greater than anything a raider could carry away from it. In modern terms, Portobello's highest and best use, from a buccaneer's point of view, was not as a warehouse to empty. It was as a hostage. The Portobello operation began as a response to a commercial failure. In the spring of 1668, Morgan had led an estimated 700 men in 12 ships against Puerto del Príncipe, an inland town in Cuba. They defeated the militia and took the town. Then they counted the proceeds. 50,000 pieces of 8 for 700 men. Before officers' shares, that works out to roughly 70 pesos a man. It was, by the standards of the trade, a failure. The 200 French privateers in the force, already angry over the division of spoils and the killing of a countryman, quit and sailed home to Tortuga. Morgan had learned the industry's core lesson. Towns hid their wealth, and sacking them recovered only what could be found. The recoverable asset was not the treasure. It was the town itself. So the next target was chosen for its balance sheet. Portobello held silver in transit, a wealthy merchant class, and a name Spain could not afford to lose. Morgan told no one. He briefly touched at Port Royal in late June, and only he and his captains knew the destination. The crews were told after they landed. Operational secrecy was not a courtesy in this industry. It was inventory protection. Consider the capital structure of the attack. On the 10th of July, Morgan anchored roughly 500 men in 9 vessels at Naus, 12 miles short of the target. The ships stayed behind. The assault went in by 23 canoes, paddling through the dark along the coast. 6 escaped English prisoners, starved and recently freed from Spanish custody, guided the approach. The heavy equipment of siege warfare was absent. No artillery train, no supply line, no reserve. The entire investment was men, muskets, canoes, and surprise. Surprise was the first asset lost. At an outlying blockhouse, 5 Spanish sentries answered a surrender demand with a volley, and the shots were heard in the city. By dawn, the garrison was arming. Morgan's men rushed the beach toward Santiago Castle, the strongest of the 3 forts, and found its walls higher than expected. Here, the operation revealed its accounting. A frontal assault would spend men, and men were the only capital on hand. So the force split. One column swept into the town itself, firing as it went, taking prisoners and securing the merchandise before it could be hidden. The unfinished fort of San Geronimo, held by 8 soldiers, fell through its own shallow water. Inside the town, the attackers freed 11 English prisoners, chained and starved, who had been used as labor on the fortifications. Their condition would matter later, in the legal accounting. Santiago still held. What happened next survives in the records of both sides. Morgan ordered ladders built, and then ordered the prisoners brought forward. The town's mayor, its friars, its nuns, its sick and elderly were marched ahead of the assault force as a human screen. The castle's gunners fired anyway, wounding several of the prisoners. Under that fire, the attackers reached the gate with axes, while a second party scaled the walls. When the red no-quarter flag rose over the ramparts, 74 of the castle's defenders were dead, including its commander. The garrisons had never stood a fair chance. Spain had budgeted these forts at a combined strength of 300 men. Sickness and neglect had left barely half that number on station. The empire's loading dock was guarded by an understaffed shift. The third fort, San Felipe, surrendered after a short fight. Its commander accepted terms, then drank poison rather than live with them. Within a day and a half, a force of roughly 500 men with no cannon had taken the third strongest city of the Spanish Main. Morgan's combat losses for the entire operation would total 18 dead and 32 wounded. The English flag went up over all 3 forts, and the operation moved to its second phase. The first phase had been military. The second was commercial. The plunder of the town proceeded on standard terms, which were ugly. Residents were interrogated, and torture was used to locate hidden valuables. But the searches only confirmed the Cuba lesson. What a town hides, a raider mostly never finds. So after a week of collection, Morgan opened the real revenue stream. He wrote to the acting president of Panama and priced the city. His opening demand was 350,000 pesos. If it went unpaid, Portobello would burn, its fortresses would be demolished, and its people would answer for how Spain had treated its English prisoners. Panama's answer arrived on foot. Don Agustin de Bracamonte marched from Panama City with an estimated 800 soldiers and militia to retake the town, and called Morgan a pirate in writing. The column came under-provisioned through 70 miles of mountain and jungle, sickening as it came. Native guides, no friends of Spain, kept Morgan informed of its progress. At a narrow pass on the only road, 200 buccaneers were waiting. The ambush broke the head of the Spanish column, by one account at a cost of 8 Spanish for every Englishman, and the follow-up attacks failed against the town's prepared defenses. Bracamonte's relief operation was now a liability on Panama's books. His force was dissolving from disease, and rumor said French privateers were sailing to reinforce Morgan. The junta in his camp reconsidered its position. Notice the structure of the negotiation, because both sides were pricing the same asset with different books. To Morgan, the city was worth whatever Spain would pay, minus the cost of waiting under threat of Spanish reinforcement. To Panama, the city was worth its fortresses, its harbor, and its role in the silver route, minus the cost of an army that was dying faster than it marched. Every day of delay moved both numbers toward each other. What followed was not a battle, but a price discovery. Letters went back and forth for a week. The demand of 350,000 met a refusal. The refusal met the threat of fire, and somewhere between the two, the parties found the market price of Portobello, 100,000 pesos. On the 1st of August, the mule train arrived, and Morgan counted the settlement. Silver ingots, plate, and coin, roughly 25,000 pounds sterling at the exchange of the day. On the 2nd of August, he kept his side of the contract. The city stood, the prisoners went free, and the fleet sailed with the ransom, the plunder, and 57 brass cannon stripped from the forts. Portobello was returned to its owners, intact and disarmed. The whole engagement had lasted 3 weeks and cost the seller 18 men. Now, the risk column, because every line of this profit was underwritten by a legal fiction. Morgan's letter of marque authorized action at sea. It said nothing about storming cities, and under the law of the day, an unprovoked land attack was simple piracy, a hanging offense. Morgan's protection was a single sentence of intelligence, a claim, extracted from a prisoner under torture, that Spain was preparing an attack on Jamaica. That claim converted the raid, on paper, from piracy into preemptive defense. The evidence was obtained by the man who needed it, using methods that guaranteed its production. No court examined it. It worked anyway. The other risks were priced in blood and diplomacy. 18 dead of roughly 500 meant about 1 man in 26 did not sail home, and that ratio was exceptional. The garrison of Santiago had died at many times that rate, and Bracamonte's relief force rotted on the road without ever reaching a battle. Spain's fury arrived by correspondence. Madrid demanded answers, the Queen Regent ordered retaliatory privateering against English shipping, and the governor of Jamaica reported to London that he had reproved Morgan for exceeding his commission. That was the entire punishment, a verbal reproof delivered by the man holding 10% of the proceeds. London celebrated the raid. Neither Morgan nor his governor faced any sanction at all. Years later, when a published account described the human shields at Santiago, Morgan sued for libel in an English court and won. So close the books on Portobello. Total revenue, ransom and plunder together, an estimated 250,000 pesos, worth somewhere between 70 and 100,000 pounds. For scale, that one operation exceeded the entire annual agricultural output of Jamaica and approached half the yearly sugar exports of Barbados. Costs? 9 vessels lightly used, 23 canoes, 5 weeks of labor, and 18 lives. Distribution followed the industry standard waterfall. Each ordinary privateer received about 120 pounds, 5 to 6 times what an honest sailor earned in a year. Morgan, as admiral, took 5% of the whole, and Governor Modiford of Jamaica, who had signed the letter of marque and never left his office, took 10%, a figure the records describe plainly as the price of the paperwork. The men who stormed the walls split the remainder. The man who sold the legal cover out-earned their admiral at a casualty rate of 0. The capital returned to Port Royal in the middle of August and was spent, by all accounts, in the usual way and at the usual speed. Recruits crowded the docks to join the next voyage. Spain rebuilt Portobello, restocked its garrisons, and resumed loading silver. Morgan raided Maracaibo the following year, then marched on Panama itself, and ended his career knighted, wealthy, and lieutenant governor of the island he had enriched. The entry in the ledger reads simply, "One city, purchased by its own government for 100,000 pesos." It remains one of the few recorded transactions in which the seller never owned the goods. The buyer already did, and both parties left satisfied that the price was fair.